It was 1987, and I was performing as a mime at the first Latin American Festival of Arts and Culture. This festival was taking place at a university in the capital city of Brazil, Brasilia. Brazil was 2 years out of a 20-year dictatorship. And we had gone to this festival to celebrate freedom and the end of oppression through the arts. You heard me right. I was performing as a mime. I had fallen in love with the art of making the invisible visible through movement and gesture. I had been inspired by Marcel Marceau, by Chaplin. At the end of my impromptu sets, 2 friends of mine approached me, said, come with us, come with us. There's a protest going on in one of the lecture halls. So still dressed in my mime attire, I kind of jogged along through the hallways, and we got to this amphitheater. The door that we entered was way up in the back of the lecture hall. And there was a mob of about 400 people going, go home, go home, go home, go home. It was filled with energy, that room. And as I looked down towards the table, way at the bottom, there was an elderly man sitting there facing the mob. There was an assistant behind him. And on the walls, there were 2 signs. One said, get your bloody hands out of our festival. The other one said, we're here to hear the resistance, not a representative of the dictatorship. Between this gentleman and the mob was the national media. The likes of the New York Times and Boston Globe of Brazil were there registering everything. And I soon learned what was going on. This elderly man in his 70s was a professor from Chile. And he had been handpicked by the dictator in Chile, Augusto Pinochet, to go to our festival and give a lecture on the life of Pablo Neruda. Pablo Neruda was a poet from Chile, a Nobel Prize laureate, a man who stood for freedom and against oppression. And here is a man handpicked by the military regime of Chile to come to this art festival and lecture about the life of this man. Of course they wanted him to go home. Go home, go home, go home. And I'm there just taking it all in. And I felt compelled to do something about it. I had done some political street theater, and I had just started doing mime. I'm like, I can do something for peace and freedom here. I can add on to this. So I start to go down towards a man who was holding a mic. I thought, I think he's the moderator. And I said, I'd like to do something for freedom here. And he looks me up and down, my 30-pound lighter self, big afro. I was still doing the white face from mime at the time. And he kind of smiles and turns to the mob and says, he'd like to do something for peace and freedom. And they look at me and they size me up and they start to chant, on the table, on the table, on the table. I'm like, say what? They wanted me to perform on the table that the man is sitting at. If I get on that table, I'm gonna get arrested. If I leave the room, I'm gonna be framed as a coward. I have to do something right here. But they wouldn't let me. On the table, on the table. I looked at the professor, and the professor was straight-faced. He was not saying yes. He was not saying no. His assistant was his bodyguard, and he was tense looking at me and looking at the professor. The cultural attaché from the embassy of Chile was there. And the students, on the table. And all of a sudden, my heart was beating here. My legs had turned like overcooked pasta. And I'm like, what do I do about this? And the whole room was like, on the table. And all of a sudden, my legs began moving so fast. My legs started moving so fast and so fast. And when they stopped and I looked down, there was a table under my feet. I was still not arrested. That's a good thing. So I better do whatever. I had no idea what I was going to do. It was going to be an impromptu performance for peace. But all of a sudden, I got it. I got the whole piece. I reached down and I picked up a military-grade rifle. I mimed one. This is a story about a mime performance, right? And I put it on my shoulder and I marched like a soldier across the table to the center of it where the professor was sitting. And then I started to scan the rifle towards the crowd. The room felt silent. And then I let out a scream that filled the whole campus. It was a primal scream, and as I was doing that, the rifle was turning into a small box. Only computer CGI and a mime can pull that off. And I opened the box ever so gently, and a bird flew out. I jumped off the table and I left. Wow. The next day, I was on all the newspapers, from the hinterlands of the Amazon to the coast. Mime keeps professor from Chile from lecturing. Mime performs for peace and against oppression. I'm a 22-year-old trying to just do some impromptu performances, and now I'm gonna get arrested. They're gonna have my name. They're gonna come after me. I'm gonna disappear. My friends stood by me, and nothing came of it, but a lot came of it. The next year, I would land a scholarship and go to Maine to study with Tony Montanaro. The dictatorship in Chile ended in 1990. By the time of his death, dictator Augusto Pinochet had some 300 cases against him for human rights violation. As Pablo Neruda said, and I quote, "You may cut all the flowers, but you can't keep spring from coming." Thank you.